You've heard about it, you've been playing it, but do you really know how many builds you can go with the new Frost Decay in Dragonflight? Well, look no further, because in today's video we will be checking the alpha version of Frost Decay, one of the specs which has had the most positive feedback regarding the talent setup and what it is, and it can be used as an example for future specs to be designed in a way that makes it fun, interesting, and versatile for that nice replayability factor. Welcome to our Dragonflight Alpha series of covering the specs and anything that has changed that we can test and we can play and we can show you guys, so that you know if your main or your alt or both are safe when Dragonflight comes out. And of course, if you like these new videos and coverage of the Dragonflight Alpha, consider hitting that like and subscribe button and enable those notifications, since we do plan on doing a gazillion of these videos and you might miss it, you know, and maybe you want to see it, because that's what content is, right? Appreciate the love and support. It only takes a couple of seconds, so thank you for, you know, being with us during these times and enjoying WoW that we all love. Now, with that out of the way, let's actually take a look at the Frost Decay. First of all, I just want to point out that I will not be going in depth into every talent and things. I will show a couple of builds that I've been playing with so far, that I've been having a lot of fun with, since numbers and builds and things can change once the full game is released, since most of the class tuning happened pretty much around the last couple of weeks of alpha beta, in the sense of, you know, the expansion is going to be released after the last phasing of the testing. So what we will be talking about is basically how the spec feels. What are the builds? Are they fun? Are they engaging? Is it going to make it a good choice for you to main Frost Decay in Dragonflight Alpha? And most likely we'll have more videos coming in the next couple of months if anything changes. But with that out of the way, the general talent tree for Frost Decay is actually kind of interesting. I mean, it's kind of the same for all of the DK talent trees, and this might see some change. However, like we discussed previously in past videos, the most amount of damage that you will have will probably be on the left-hand side of the general tree, which is, if you would have to classify it in any way, would be the Frost Decay side of the talent tree, with Empower Rune Weapon being the most iconic one, and Rune Empowerment as well being probably the best way to get runes back, as well as there's a Rune Mastery talent, I believe, just underneath Horn of Winter that you might also want if you are playing Frost Decay in any capacity. There are, of course, other talents a little bit sprinkled in the blood and a little bit sprinkled in Unholy for some more damage and fuel to your playstyle and overall output. And then we go into the general talent tree. And for the purpose of this video, I have played 3 main builds, and I'm sure there are variations and quirks and things that you can change, which is a testament on how awesome these new talents are and how cool the system can make replayability an amazing factor. But the main builds that I've went through are Obliteration, Ice Cap, and Breath of Sindragosa. First of all, my personal kind of favorite being Obliteration. It was actually a blast. We did a couple of Shadowlands Mythics, since that's kind of the hardest content we have access to when it comes to consistently putting out those skills into practice and see exactly how it is. Like, numbers aside, even though you cannot see them on screen, I have logged the runs. It feels pretty good to do. Now, you might notice that there is also a talent in the Unholy general talent tree that makes Death and Decay possible for you to cleave in with Obliteration, similar to what we've had with Night Fate Death's Due, which is good that that kind of factors into your playstyle, since Obliteration really suffered from AoE output. And not to mention, one of the key components of the Obliteration or any two-handed build is the Glacial Advance talent that you might have seen just earlier going into this, which obviously has always been a talent since Legion, but it was always on a competitive row with Gathering Storm and never really took shine since Gathering Storm was so good. But because you can take Glacial Advance, you can actually use a two-handed weapon that you can enchant with Rune of Fallen Crusaders, since the DK runes are pretty significant in terms of damage output, and you also have a talent in the Unholy talent tree that makes rune forging effect way stronger. I think it goes all the way to 30% stronger, which is pretty crazy. And, you know, having Glacial Advance that can apply Razor Eyes, which would be the ideal enchanted to play any frost spec since it increases frost damage that you do, is great. Not to mention that now with the talent trees and also what we have right now in Shadowlands, obliterates deal frost damage, which is pretty good. And of course, don't forget, you do have the Might of the Frozen Wastes talent, which makes two-hander stronger and can actually pump some real damage. And you can go all the way to the right-hand side of the tree and pick a bunch of stuff. I have played with Chill Streak, which is fucking amazing that it's back into the normal PvE rotation because it has been a PvP talent for the longest time. And if you have played Frost Decay in 8.3 in BFA, you could actually play with the ability with a certain essence combination, even though it was a PvP talent. And let me tell you, it was fun to blast Chill Streak. It's a core iconic spell ability, especially for frost-orientated specs that deal frost damage. Having this bounciness between spells can make cleave really good, and especially good in AoE as well. And going into the next build, although this is something that you can use for Obliteration as well, Ice Cap, which is very closely related since Obliteration and Ice Cap are capstone talents that are actually a choice. You cannot have both, since if you had both, that would probably be a little bit overpowered. However, we can talk about the fact that Breath still kind of outshines both of these talents, so maybe having them at the same time wouldn't be that bad. However, if you do get Ice Cap, I feel like right now on Alpha, with the current level of gear that we have, with the current level of haste and crit and all that good stuff, Ice Cap is the more fluid one. Sure, you don't have back-to-back killing machines in that Pillar of Frost window, but you have so many Pillar of Frost and it feels smooth. And weirdly enough, if you still play Glacial Advance, which you should, there are some mechanics that you need to take into consideration and actually micromanage, since if you've played Frost Decay now, which you have kind of Glacial Advance baked into the tier set, which makes two-hander possible, Glacial Advance is passive. You don't really control anything on it, so it doesn't really need any input from you. However, if you do play it, and obviously this applies to Obliteration as well, you kind of have to manage the Razor Eye stacks. Now, with a bunch of other talents that buff Frost Strike up by quite a bit, you don't really want to spam Glacial Advance unless it's in like pure AoE, but you do want to use it to maintain those Razor Eyes stacks. On top of that, you have the Frostwhelp Indignation, which I mentioned that it works for both Obliteration as well, but obviously it's a little bit better for Ice Cap since you do have more pillars. If you haven't played, again, 8.3 Frost Decay, which was one of the best iterations of Frost Decays in the last couple of years in terms of, you know, how many things you had, how many toys. Frostwhelp Indignation, which is not named that, I think is just something Frostwhelp. Once you pop your Pillar of Frost, you shoot out a little baby Frostwhelp dragon that blasts everything with some frost damage, and more importantly, per target hit, it gives you 4% mastery, which caps, I think, at 20%, so at 5 targets would be the max that you need to hit. It's kind of like Frostworm's Fury, so when you pop Pillar of Frost, you kind of want to make sure that all the mobs are in front of you, and then you get a whole bunch of extra mastery, which increases the the damage of the frost abilities rather, which of course works really well with your DPS windows that are getting shorter since you do reduce the cooldown of Pillar of Frost with the Ice Cap talent. Again, really awesome. And of course, if you also play the Chill Streak talent, you can actually bounce a bunch of empowered Chill Streak Frost Bolts. Also, if you go on the right-hand side, which you will, you'll probably get Remorseless Winter, Biting Cold, and maybe even Gathering Storm, specifically if you do get the Frostwhelp talent, which is also really good since Gathering Storm is really strong. Biting Cold is also really strong, which is one of the main damage sources of Frost Decays now. And not to mention that on top of all of this, if you have more points, which we didn't at level 65, 66 in Alpha, since we don't have all the talents yet, you can also get Ever Frost, which obviously increases Remorseless Winter's damage even more. So you kind of have the best of all worlds right now. And yeah, Ice Cap is really fun. In the middle, you still have Frostworm's Fury as a kind of another capstone talent, but not really, because the capstone is just underneath it, which is the Frostworm Fury Legendary, which is probably more oriented towards PvP, but this may be my only real gripe with the spec, because if you do want to go deep into a two-hander build with decent AoE to be able to play in dungeons, or if you do want to go deep into Breath, which we will see in a second, and you do want to have that single target obliterate buffs to your boss, it's very hard to snag rather Frostworm's Fury as well. It's not impossible, but seems like you would have to sacrifice a little bit too much, and Frostworm's Fury is such an iconic Frost Decay talent that is just a shame. I suppose you cannot have the best of all worlds, right? The builds are so awesome, they're really complementing single target and AoE, and also have the most iconic Frost Decay ability. Might be a little bit too much considering that a lot of specs are getting shafted right now. We'll see exactly how that plays out. but it's still pretty good, it's still pretty fun. And moving into the Breath of Sindragosa, which is all the way to the right-hand side, which is the AoE version of the spec. Funny enough, that Breath has always been the best rate ability that you can pick, even though Obliteration supposedly does more single target damage. Breath is there, and Breath is still fun, and Breath still pumps, and you will probably want to use Breath with dual wield, since if you do go Breath, it's again a little bit harder to get to Glacial Advance. You can get to Glacial Advance, but it's actually not worth it. I mean, you're not gonna spam Glacial Advance during Breath because you don't really want those runic power spenders during Breath, so you don't need to apply Razor Ice with Glacial Advance, meaning that you will probably definitely 100% have to play dual wield, since 200s are a little bit too slow to maintain that Breath uptime. As far as the Breath build, if you do decide to go with it, it's pretty much the Breath DK that you have right now, with maybe 1 or 2 extra funnels into more single target damage, because you do get a bunch of, you know, obliterate fuels from the left-hand side of the tree with the extra talent points that you do end up having. And Breath is still pretty fun. The content that we didn't really do a good job at making me get an amazing feel for Breath, since shit died really quick, since obviously we're over-leveling the Shadowlands dungeon, so I'm actually really excited to wait for the actual Dragonflight dungeons, or at least dungeons that scale to our level, so that we can actually blast some level appropriate mobs and get a feel for the damage. And once, you know, the UI is fixed and we can see the damage numbers on screen, and hopefully we can get add-ons like damage meters or details or whatever to work, we can actually get a feel as to where the damage is situated, but likely it's never going to overclass Evoker. So this is pretty much it with Frost Decay. It looks like an amazing spec to main. If you do decide to keep on your Frost Decay, or if you do decide to switch from something else to a Frost Decay in Dragonflight Alpha, so far, the initial look, which obviously can change, but it's one of the most complete specs that we have so far available to test, is looking pretty good. You will probably definitely 100% not be disappointed if you do choose to play Frost Decay. Now, obviously, numbers are always subject to change. Tuning is always a factor. However, looking at how they've responded to pretty much everything community focused and feedback related, it's safe to assume that if, for whatever reason, Frost Decay does no damage, it will probably be buffed, which is definitely not the case. Frost Decay does decent and actually quite a bit of damage at level 65 compared to the other specs that I was able to do dungeons with, because we did have some logs. And that's usually a good thing, since Frost Decay scales really well with gear, and the more gear you have, the better those breath windows get, the bigger those crits get, and the more often those crits are, meaning that even if you do play a two-hander not breath, you'll still slap a big pillar of frost window damage output. And that's pretty much it when it comes to our first look of Frost Decay. It is bonkers, it is fun, I would highly recommend it. And if you do want to get a more in-depth feel about the talents of Frost Decay and in conjunction on Holy Decay, we do have an episode on our Mocast channel where we go with the theory crafters and look at the talents and how they are designed and how well they play with each other. Most likely, a new episode on the talents will come in the next couple of weeks as well. So you will have all of the DK content that you need on this channel, so make sure you have that subscribe button enabled, man, and the like. Come on, it only takes like a couple of seconds, and you show your appreciation and you support your boys here who are doing hard work, and we actually do enjoy doing this thing for you, and maybe you want to see all of them. But thank you for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time. Thank you, dear patrons, for supporting the channel and everything that you do. You guys are amazing. Patreon link down below if you want to support the channel a little bit more. See ya!
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.